With that, we have Terrell, who is going to be speaking on the unexpected bee visitation to wind-pollinated salt marsh plants in Nova Scotia.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be speaking for the first time at the BCon this year. I also want to say a thank you to Amanda earlier for her recognition of Sheila Culla's career. I never met Sheila, but I feel like many others that I've been greatly impacted by her work, and I've always been one degree of separation away from her. So I'm really happy that we can all come together and honor her at this conference. And so I'm kind of giving away the punchline of my talk today right off the bat with the title, but I'm going to introduce you first to the landscape of this study. And so here is North America. Of course, if you zoom in here, I'm in the province of Nova Scotia. And if you zoom in further, some of you might be familiar with the Bay of Fundy. So the Bay of Fundy is a tidal area which hosts recently dethroned the highest tides in the world. On average, the tides in this area are around 14 meters. And so salt marshes are incredibly unique ecosystems, but this system in particular is incredibly unique for the range of tidal areas. Now, early colonial settlers in this region went around to salt marshes in the province and did a lot of diking. And dikes are barriers of earth that prevent the flooding of upland habitat. And what you can see here in the green areas is the extent of dike lands in Nova Scotia, which also provides some of the most valuable agricultural land in the province. However, the consequences of these dike lands has been the loss of somewhere between 90 and 95% of salt marshes in the province. And this is really worrying. Salt marshes are among the best carbon sinks and are really important for fighting climate change, as well as they offer a number of other ecosystem services, such as storm surge protection and sea level rise protection against erosion. Now, if you're looking at this photo here, you're probably thinking already, well, I mean, that salt marsh, that's mostly grasses. And you would be right. Salt marshes are dominated by graminoids. And you might be thinking, well, what do bees and graminoids have to do with each other? Well, I do want to just sort of set up the ecosystem as a whole. So in the low area here where I'm standing, this is the low marsh where you can find Sproblus alterniflorus. Where I'm standing is an area of the marsh that is flooded twice daily. And so you can imagine just the extreme tides in this area. Then we have the mid-marsh where you begin to see a few different species, and the speciation really is determined by how frequently it's inundated and how salt tolerant the species are. So we see another Sproblus species as well as Juncus juridii, and then up near the sort of brackish, almost upland edge, we see another community primarily dominated by Sproblus michicanus, Distillus baccata, and Carex palaceae. And so, as I've already mentioned, these ecosystems are dominated in biomass by these wind-pollinated graminoids and other forbs. And so if you're looking at this, like, you'd be right to conclude there's not much showy floral resources for bees and other pollinators. Now, that's not to say that there's not any showy flowers on salt marshes. We have things like seaside goldenrod, sea lavender, and flat-top goldenrod that can be commonly found in sort of mid-marsh and even into the low marsh areas. And then up near the brackish edge, we also have things like hedge bindweed, silverweed, as well as New York aster. And just as a little sort of Easter egg, if you look really closely at this bindweed, you can see a little hylaeus just hiding in there. And so there are some floral resources, but back in the summer of 2020, when I was still a undergraduate honors student, we went in to sort of study these marshes in comparison to dikes, so those upland habitats where there's lots of showy flowers. And, you know, our hypothesis was, well, we're going to find lots of bees in dikes and not many in marshes because there's lots of flowers in dikes and not many flowers at all in salt marshes. And so in terms of the floral hypothesis, this is what we saw. And so just to orient you here, floral abundance is ordinal in this case. So 0 is no flowers, 3 is a score of very high floral abundance. And for both abundance of flowers as well as the richness of floral species, we see much greater floral resources on dikes compared to salt marshes. Now, it gets a bit confusing because when we look at the pollinator communities, which was mostly made up of bee species that we caught in our surveys, there's no significant difference between the dike habitats and the salt marsh habitats. There is a slightly higher signal of pollinator abundance as well as species richness in dikes, but this difference is not statistically significant. And regardless, we caught a lot more bees on salt marshes and a far greater richness of species on marshes than we were at all expecting. And this is really confusing. And so across tens of thousands of pollinator studies, bee abundance and richness, as well as floral abundance and richness, are consistently positively correlated with one another. And so, this sort of result out of my honors thesis was really perplexing and unexpected. And so this, my honors thesis was published in December of last year. And so I began to think more about, with its publication, like what is driving this decoupling? And is it likely that the floral resources that we estimated, which did not include these graminoids because we were only focusing on showy flowers, were the floral resources for these pollinators underestimated, which could explain this decoupling between the pollinator community and the floral community? Well, in fact, some evidence of this came from my fieldwork. So while surveying at 3 different salt marsh sites, myself and my field assistant, Evan McNamara, actually witnessed bumblebees visiting a salt marsh grass, Sprobolus michicanus. And at this point, it was August, and our sort of methods were firm in stone. And I was just a undergrad, and so at this point it was too late to include graminoids in our floral abundance surveys. However, as we'll see, this was a great hint into investigating these species further. And to this day, I kick myself for not taking any photos, because all we really have of evidence for this is sort of our word, as well as this chicken scratch I wrote. Several bombas seen trying to pollinate the alt, which I thought it was Sprobolus alterniflorus. It was actually Sprobolus michicanus, as I come to realize later. And so to this day, I really kick myself. And so when I was reflecting on my publication, I had the realization, like, I never took a photo, but what are the chances somebody else has taken a photo? And so all of you are probably thinking right away, iNaturalist. And so if you're not familiar with iNaturalist, it's a crowdsourced website where members of the public can upload photos of species and sort of come together to a consensus about what species is being observed. And iNaturalist is absolutely exploding in popularity. In July of last year, they surpassed 200 million observations, which is an increase of 100 million observations in just the last 2 years alone. So the site is exploding. And previously, community science data from iNaturalist has been shown for really important for monitoring insect populations, such as species invasions. However, they've not really been applied that much in pollinator communities. And so what I did is I created a list of a bunch of different wind-pollinated graminoids, forbs, and a single shrub in Nova Scotia. I downloaded a list of research-grade observations. So these are observations of high quality. And I clicked through each observation one at a time and looked for evidence of pollinators. And so in total, there was about 20,000 observations or so that I clicked through. And wouldn't you know, I was able to find observations of pollinators visiting grasses in those iNaturalist observations. So Sprobolus michicanus was the one that I observed in my study. And here we see in a single observation on iNaturalist, we can see a bumblebee very clearly grasping onto the spikelet and collecting pollen there, as well as what I suspect is an Andrena species. So already, like, this was on the very first page that I clicked through. And so I was very stoked. I was like, yes, I'm going to find so much evidence. Well, I kind of jumped the gun on that, but I did find more. And so more observations for Michiconus. Here we can see hoverflies or Syrphidae, again, visiting the spikelets of these species. Then another Sprobolus species, that one from the low marsh area, we can see a bumblebee here, as well as sort of something resembling a lady beetle. Then the Pumilus species in that mid-marsh area, again, we see another bumblebee clearly grasping and collecting pollen. Carex palaceae, which is a sedge. It's kind of hard to see here, but if just above the pointer there, you can see a hoverfly. Now, this record is a little bit suspicious. Is it exactly visiting, or is it just sort of investigating? It's kind of hard to tell. In terms of forbs, the only forb I found evidence for was Plantago marittima. Here we can see a hoverfly and another hoverfly here. This isn't as surprising, as it's well known that several Plantago species that are wind-pollinated are also visited by insect pollinators. And then that single shrub species found in Nova Scotia, we can see a bumblebee very clearly collecting pollen there. And if you look really closely, you can see all kinds of pollen dropping off of the floret there. So I think that's really, really cool. So to sort of summarize, across those 14 species that I looked at, I found a total of 10 observations of almost 20,000. Now, are these interactions happening at that rare of a frequency? We really can't tell. There's lots of biases that go into opportunistic observation data, and I'd be happy to chat more about those if anyone has any questions. And so to conclude, iNaturalist's observations of bees and other pollinators visiting saltmarsh wind-pollinated taxa supports the hypothesis that these taxa are actually providing floral resources to these saltmarsh bee communities. Further investigation into the pollination biology of these taxa, especially Sprobolus species, because they're so abundant in salt marshes, is warranted. And they may reveal that they are in fact actually pollinated by both wind and insects, or Ambophilus species. And so just a quick call to field researchers: if you see a bee or another pollinator on a wind-pollinated saltmarsh plant, please at me on iNaturalist at T.Roulston. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and as well thank the iNaturalist observations that I used in this study.